I am not a vegan. I'm not a vegetarian. I'm not even a pescatarian. I eat what I feel like eating. I hunt, I fish, like many families in the area. Mine used to own a dairy farm until, fucking Reagan. And I preface with this because if we're gonna have a conversation about food sustainability and the impacts of our diets and agriculture on our environment, people need to listen with an open mind to objective facts. And when it comes to this topic in particular, most people don't. And for understandable reasons. Diets are something that's very personal to us, and people do not like to be made to feel guilty about their lifestyles and their choices. But 90% of the time when somebody does try to have these conversations, it's generally from people who, if we're being honest, aren't a ton of fun at parties. And usually they're a bit abrasive, meat is murder. Kind of get them pro-life protester vibes, it's just not real conducive to a genuine conversation. So I preface to make very clear that I'm not speaking on this topic from any level of moral high ground whatsoever. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me. But all that said, I can still fucking read. And I do my best to limit my confirmation bias as much as possible. And the simple, inconvenient truth is meat's a major problem. That's a simple fact. However, why it and all of our agricultural practices in general are a major problem is quite a bit more complex. So complex that I'm gonna do my best to hit the major bullet points, but there's a lot of nuance and details that you just can't fit in a video. This conversation should really start on the topic of world hunger and food insecurity. We are all aware that hunger is a humanitarian crisis worldwide. You've also probably heard that the United States makes enough food to feed 10 billion people, and we only have 7 billion in the world. So why are there any hungry people? This is one of those complex questions that has a lot of answers. Logistics, for one. It's not always practical or economical to grow something here, but feed it to somebody on the other side of the world. But one of the biggest issues is half the food crops that we grow is not food for us. It's food for our food. All of this, the vast majority of the cornfields and the bean fields you drive by, all goes to feed livestock. Now, it takes 3 to 6 pounds of grain to produce a single pound of meat. It also requires 100 times more water to produce a pound of meat than it does a pound of grain. To put this into another perspective, you have to put roughly 28 calories into livestock to get a single calorie out of a meat or dairy product. So when we grow most of our food to feed our food, you can see that there is a few sustainability issues with that equation. But that's just the first domino, because now that we need to grow all this food to feed our food, we need lots of fertile land to do it on. And then we need a lot more land to hold the food that we're feeding with the other food. Fertile land with enough water to grow crops is a limited resource. So limited that we're cutting down the fucking rainforest and destroying habitat so we can grow corn to feed cows. And then to get better yields to grow all that corn to feed the cows, we need fertilizer and herbicides and pesticides. And then we need to genetically modify the crops so they can stand up to the herbicides and the pesticides. And that's where you get Roundup Ready corn, which is corn that's immune to Agent Orange, which is the herbicide that they sprayed all over Vietnam to kill the jungle and gave all the Vietnam vets cancer. To be clear, Roundup is not Agent Orange. They work in a very similar way, but they're technically chemically different. That's a different video for a different time, though. Then all these pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizer get into the groundwater, into lakes, rivers, and streams, into the soil, and that kills off important parts of our ecosystem, like the bees. And just so you're aware, we will go extinct without bees. They're kind of a big deal. And it causes toxic algae blooms in lakes. We get them around here every summer now. And what's worse is eventually the herbicides and the pesticides just quit fucking working because the bugs and the weeds eventually evolved the resistance to them that we genetically engineered the corn to have. And I think you can infer that there's way more localized environmental impacts as well, but we need to move on to the climate impacts. Cattle are responsible for nearly 40% of anthropological methane released into the atmosphere. And methane is a way more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And then you've got the carbon output of putting the grain in the ground, taking the grain out of the ground, drying the grain, trucking the grain and the meat products all over the place. It takes a lot of fucking fuel to farm. As a result, 12 to 20% of all greenhouse gases come from agriculture. Then there's the health implications for us. It's no secret red meat and processed meats aren't exactly good for us, and all the antibiotics and growth hormones have had some pretty obvious effects on society. At this rate, it's projected that half the population of the entire planet, not the United States, the world, is going to be obese by 2035. We are well on our way to WALL-E, people. Okay, so the world's ending because we can't stop eating McDonald's, but how did we get here? The answer is farm subsidies and corporate lobbying. During the Great Depression, we started heavily subsidizing the agricultural industry to stabilize the market for both farmers and consumers. We did that in large part by buying up a bunch of excess food product and paying farmers not to plant to keep supply and prices stable. And it worked. It worked great for decades. The problem is that economies change and policies should change with it, and it didn't. Farmers would produce because the government would just buy it. diet. And we'd end up with these huge stockpiles of corn, dairy, and wheat that the government owned. It turned out there was a lot of money in this, so changing the policy got hard because anywhere there's money, there's lobbyists. Eventually, the US government was just sitting on billions of pounds of wheat and grain and cheese, and like, we need to do something with it. That's when Ronnie Reagan was like, hey, let's just give all this shitty government cheese to people on welfare and kids at school. The irony is that government cheese was literally welfare for corporate ag. But again, another topic. But then the solution was the food pyramid, which was what they told you should eat that's good for you, except it was actually what the agricultural lobby told the government they needed to tell people what was good for them so we would eat it so they could continue to sell it to us and make lots of money, because that's already what they're set up to produce. And that's how we got to where we are today. And they're still fucking doing it. In fact, they just came out with a new food pyramid that is still very clearly heavily influenced by the ag lobby. The most recently empirically based draft for the food pyramid was rejected by the USDA and then modified to put red meat and dairy products where the lobby suggested they maybe should go. And that's not a conspiracy theory, it's a pretty open secret. So what can we do about it? Obviously, there's the personal responsibility part none of us want to do or talk about. But as shitty as it is, the reality is that a vegan diet does have about a quarter of the environmental impact and carbon footprint of a high meat diet. But you don't have to go vegan to make a difference. In fact, the biggest reduction in environmental impact comes from people who go from a high meat diet to a lower meat diet. Impact differences between low meat, pescatarian, vegetarian, and vegan is all pretty minimal. So small changes can make a big difference. And gardening, pretty much all the food you get from a garden you grow yourself has basically no environmental impact. Technically has positive environmental impacts because it's sequestering carbon and increasing biodiversity. But enough with the personal responsibility shit. We ain't gonna do it. Most of us are fat, lazy slobs, me included. Hell, I've got plenty of space and no excuses except I've done a garden and it's a lot of work and I don't wanna. Once again, I'm not speaking on this from a place of moral superiority. I'm just telling you what the unfortunate facts are. Lab-grown meat is something you'll start seeing more and more of, which I know a bunch of people are weirded out about, but I'm personally super excited. It'd solve a bunch of our environmental issues, it's cruelty-free, and then once you can just grow any meat you want, think about all the cool shit you could try, like fucking hippo or rhino or something. So anyway, one thing you can do is keep an open mind to that. Ultimately, the real thing we should be focusing on is policy. And the solution is something we should all be able to get behind because it's one of the few things you can solve with capitalism. We just need to stop giving big agriculture welfare checks. Just stop fucking subsidizing meat and dairy because the shit's fucking expensive. In fact, all the people who bitch about people on welfare getting a free meal while eating their steak are on fucking welfare. A pound of hamburger would cost $30 if it wasn't subsidized. So every time you eat meat, the taxpayers bought you the majority of your fucking meal. So there's a solution. Cut the subsidies and the free market will fix the problem. And if you don't agree with it, you're a fucking socialist. Ciao.